Don't argue with me. Do exactly what I say.
I am complying. I know the law. Please just tell me what you want me to do.
I'm doing everything right. My hands are visible. I didn't do anything wrong.
Then explain why you look nervous.
Don't talk back. Do exactly what I say.
I am complying. I know the law. Please just tell me what to do.
Because right now, your life depends on what I believe.
What if I told you that doing everything right could still get you killed? What if I told you that keeping your hands visible, your voice calm, your record clean, that following every rule you were ever taught still wasn't enough to keep you safe? Picture this. It's before sunrise. The streets are empty. The city is quiet in a way that feels almost peaceful. And then, red and blue lights explode behind you. Your heart drops, even though you've done nothing wrong. Your hands shake, even though you know the law. Your breath shortens, even though you're innocent. Now imagine realizing in that moment that your survival doesn't depend on truth. It depends on whether the person pointing a weapon at you believes you deserve to live. This is not a story about a bad day. This is not a story about one mistake. This is a story about what happens when fear wears a badge, and how close America comes every single day to irreversible tragedy. Tonight, you're going to hear the story of a black man who was harassed, threatened, and humiliated by police. A man who complied perfectly, a man who nearly lost everything until one detail stopped the violence cold. And when you hear what that detail was, you'll understand something heartbreaking about how power really works in this country. This story will make you angry. It will make your chest tighten. It may even make you question things you thought you understood. But by the end, it will also remind you why love, accountability, and courage still matter, and why a stronger America is still possible if we choose one another over fear. If you believe stories like this must be told, if you believe racism must be confronted, not hidden, subscribe now to the Racist Reality Channel and stay with us. Because this isn't just a story, it's America's story, and it starts right now. The stop that should never happen. The city was still asleep. Columbus, Ohio, lay quiet beneath the dim glow of sodium streetlights. The sky stretched thin and dark as dawn hesitated somewhere beyond the horizon. The world at 5:52 a.m. felt unfinished. No traffic, no voices, just the low hum of distant highways and the occasional sigh of wind brushing against empty storefronts. Daniel Brooks liked this hour because it didn't ask questions. At 39 years old, Daniel had learned how rare silence could be. His life was filled with responsibility, deadlines, patrol schedules, performance reviews, and the unspoken weight of being the person others turned to when things went wrong. He was a police sergeant, a husband, a father, and a man who had spent nearly half his life believing that service mattered. He drove his charcoal gray sedan steadily down an industrial road that cut through the east side of the city, hands resting naturally at 10 and 2. A habit, a reflex, a reminder of how deeply the job had embedded itself into his body. His speed hovered precisely at the limit. His turn signal clicked softly as he changed lanes, though there was no one else around to see it. In the cup holder beside him sat a thermos of black coffee, still too hot to drink. The radio murmured. News headlines he wasn't really listening to. In 40 minutes, he would stand in front of his unit and roll call. He would remind young officers to slow down situations, to watch their tone, and to remember that authority without restraint was just another form of violence. He had given that speech more times than he could count. Daniel wore navy trousers and duty boots, but not his uniform shirt. It hung neatly on a hanger in the back seat, pressed and wrinkle-free. Over a plain black t-shirt, he wore a lightweight jacket zipped halfway up against the cold October air. His badge and service weapon rested on his belt, concealed beneath the fabric of his uniform. This was routine. Many officers traveled to work this way. Less attention, less hassle. Nothing about this morning felt unusual. That was why the lights shattered everything. Red and blue exploded in his rearview mirror, sudden and violent, filling the car with pulsing color. The calm of the morning fractured instantly, replaced by a sharp, visceral drop in Daniel's stomach. It didn't matter that he was a sergeant. It didn't matter that he had done nothing wrong. It didn't matter that he enforced these very laws for a living. His body reacted before his mind could reason it away. His heart slammed against his ribs. His breath shortened. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. Somewhere deep inside him, an old inherited alarm began to scream, the same alarm that had lived in his father's chest, in his grandfather's before him. The badge could not silence it. Daniel eased the car to the shoulder beneath a flickering street lamp. Park, engine off. Training took over, crisp and automatic. All 4 windows down. Dome light on. Hands placed high on the steering wheel. Fingers spread wide. Every movement is deliberate. Every signal is clear. He became the image of compliance because experience had taught him that survival sometimes depended on looking harmless. Behind him, a white patrol SUV rolled to a stop at an angle, its engine idling. Inside sat Officer Ryan Keller, 24 years old, 3 years into the job, nearing the end of a long and unremarkable overnight shift. No arrests, no excitement, no numbers to show for 8 hours of waiting. Then he saw Daniel, a black man, a nice car, an empty road before sunrise. Keller's mind filled in the blanks long before his feet hit the pavement. He stepped out of the patrol vehicle with tension already coiled through his shoulders, his hand hovering close to his holster. His body camera blinked red, recording every second. The footage would later be dissected frame by frame, but in that moment, there was no awareness of accountability, only instinct shaped by fear and bias. Keller approached fast, too fast. He didn't walk up like this was a traffic stop. He walked up like this was a threat. His flashlight beam slammed into Daniel's side mirror, then swept aggressively across the interior of the car, cutting through the darkness like a weapon. "Driver, keep your hands where I can see them." Daniel's voice came out calm, steady, almost soothing. "My hands are visible, officer." He did not raise his voice. He did not ask why he'd been stopped. He knew better. Even confidence could be mistaken for defiance when it came from someone who looked like him. Keller closed the distance, boots crunching against gravel. "What are you doing out here this early?" he demanded. Daniel swallowed once. "I'm on my way to work." Keller's mouth tightened. "Work? Where do you work?" "Downtown." Daniel paused. He did not identify himself as law enforcement. Not yet. Not because he was hiding anything, but because part of him still carried a fragile hope, one he rarely admitted even to himself. A hope that maybe just once he could be treated as a citizen first. A man, not a stereotype. "License and registration," Keller snapped. "It's in the glove compartment," Daniel said carefully. "I'm going to reach for it now. My wallet is in my back pocket. I'll reach for that second." "Just get it," Keller barked. Daniel moved slowly, painfully aware that reaching was one of the most dangerous actions a black man could take in the presence of a nervous officer. He retrieved the documents and extended them outward, keeping his movements visible. Keller snatched them from his hand. He glanced at the name, then back at Daniel's face. "Is this your car?" "Yes, sir. It's registered to me." Keller leaned back slightly and inhaled, his nostrils flaring in an exaggerated gesture. "It smells like marijuana in here." The words landed heavily. Daniel felt something sink inside him. Not panic, but a deep, hollow disappointment. He had heard this line before. He had corrected rookies for using it. He had written reports explaining why it was unacceptable. And now it was being used on him. "There's no marijuana in this vehicle, officer," Daniel said firmly, his voice still controlled. "I don't smoke." Keller's jaw tightened. "I know what I smell." The lie was perfect in its simplicity, impossible to disprove, a legal doorway to escalation. Daniel knew exactly what came next. "Step out of the car." "For what purpose?" Daniel asked. He was not refusing. He was not challenging authority. He was asking a question, a small assertion of dignity, of rights, of humanity. Keller's composure snapped. "Because I told you to," he shouted. "Step out now or I'll remove you." The temperature of the moment changed instantly. The air felt heavier, sharper. Daniel looked at the young officer standing inches away, the rigid posture, the wide eyes, the nervous aggression masquerading as control. He saw the fear underneath it all, and he knew how dangerous fear could be when given a badge and a weapon. This was no longer about a traffic stop. This was about dominance. This was about whether he would survive the next few minutes. And in that realization, something painful settled into Daniel's chest. The understanding that his education, his service, his years of protecting others meant nothing here. That in this moment, stripped of uniform and context, he was simply a black man on the side of the road, navigating someone else's fear. The lesson was unspoken but brutal. In America, innocence is not always enough. Compliance is not always protection. And justice does not always arrive in time. As Daniel prepared to step out of the car, he carried not just his own fear, but the weight of every man who had stood in the same place, hoping calm would be enough. And the audience feels it too, because this is not just his story, it is ours. Two men, two realities. The road felt wider once Daniel stepped out of the car, not because there was more space, but because the distance between safety and danger had suddenly become visible. The pavement stretched long and empty in both directions, illuminated by the harsh, unflattering glow of streetlights that showed everything and protected nothing. "Turn around," Officer Keller commanded. "Face the vehicle. Hands on the roof." Daniel obeyed. He moved slowly, narrating his actions with the calm, deliberate cadence he used when training rookies. He placed his palms flat against the cold metal of the car, fingers spread. The chills seeped through his skin, grounding him in the moment, whether he wanted it to or not. This was the position. Every black man knew it, even if they had never been taught it. The posture of surrender that wasn't surrender at all, but survival. Head slightly down, shoulders relaxed but not too relaxed, still enough to appear compliant, not so stiff as to appear threatening. Behind him, Daniel could feel Keller's presence more than hear it. The officer's boots scraped against the asphalt as he repositioned himself, creating space, angling for control. Daniel recognized the movement instantly. He had taught it himself. But something was off. This wasn't procedure. This was performance. Keller's breathing was heavy, uneven. Fear pulsed through the space between them, thick and electric. Daniel knew that fear well, not as an abstract concept, but as something he had learned to manage, to slow down, to diffuse in others. But fear without discipline becomes something else. It becomes dangerous. "What's in your pockets?" Keller asked sharply. "Nothing but my wallet," Daniel replied. "It's in my back right pocket. Don't reach for it." "I won't." Keller circled slightly, his steps quick and uncertain. His hand hovered near his taser now, fingers twitching as if rehearsing a future he was not yet sure he wanted. Daniel stared at the chipped paint on the hood of his car, focusing on something small and ordinary. He had learned long ago that panic often started when the mind searched for meaning too quickly. "Slow down," he told himself. Slow everything down. Inside his chest, his heart hammered anyway. To Keller, this scene looked like control. A lone officer, a compliant suspect, a quiet road. The kind of encounter they talked about in briefings, the ones that could turn violent in a heartbeat. Keller had been trained to expect the worst, and that expectation shaped everything he saw. He did not see Daniel's restraint. He did not see the discipline it took to remain calm while adrenaline screamed for action. He saw a body that did not match the image of authority he had been taught to trust. Two men stood on the same stretch of pavement, experiencing entirely different realities. For Daniel, this was a memory unfolding in real time, a mosaic of stories he had grown up hearing. His father's voice warns him to be careful. His mother's eyes followed him out the door, carrying a fear she never named, but always felt. The names that echoed through the years, men who had complied and still had not made it home. For Keller, this was a test, a moment to assert control, a moment to prove competence, a moment shaped by statistics, by training videos, by whispered stories in locker rooms about danger that always seemed to wear the same face. "Why are you nervous?" Keller asked. The question landed heavily with accusation. "I'm not nervous," Daniel said. "I'm complying." Keller scoffed. "Everyone says that." Daniel closed his eyes for half a second, long enough to steady himself, not long enough to be noticed. He knew this line too, the way suspicion disguised itself as insight. Everyone says that. What Keller meant was, "I don't believe you." And belief, Daniel understood, was the most dangerous variable of all. "You said you're going to work," Keller continued. "What kind of work starts before 6 in the morning?" Daniel chose his words carefully. "Public service." Keller paused. Public service, he repeated as if tasting the phrase. That's supposed to impress me? It's the truth. Silence stretched between them. The streetlight above flickered, buzzing faintly. Somewhere in the distance, a delivery truck groaned to life. The world continued, indifferent to the standoff unfolding in its margins. Keller took another step closer. I told you it smells like weed, he said. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to search your car. Daniel felt the familiar ache rise behind his ribs, the frustration of knowing the law and knowing it didn't matter, the understanding that legality often bends beneath confidence, that authority spoken loudly enough could drown out rights entirely. There's no probable cause for a search, Daniel said, keeping his voice level. I've complied with every instruction. Keller's posture stiffened. Are you telling me how to do my job? I'm asking you to slow this down. That was the mistake. Keller's voice rose, sharp and brittle. Don't tell me what to do. Fear had tipped into anger now, the most volatile transformation of all. I need you to listen to me, Daniel said, his tone dropping into the register he used on the street. Firm, controlled, authoritative without aggression. You're escalating this unnecessarily. Keller laughed, short and humorless. You don't look like anyone I need to listen to. The words hit Daniel with a force that had nothing to do with volume. They were said casually, almost dismissively, but beneath them lay a verdict older than either of them. You don't look like an authority. You don't look innocent. You don't look like you belong. For a moment, Daniel felt something crack inside him. Not fear, not anger, but grief. The grief of realizing how little progress really looked like when measured against moments like this. How thin the line was between respect and disregard. He had trained officers younger than Keller. He had mentored them, corrected them, and defended them when the public turned hostile. He had believed, perhaps naively, that professionalism could overcome bias. Standing there now, palms pressed against cold metal, he felt that belief slipping. Keller reached for his taser. The sound of the safety disengaging was quiet, almost polite, but Daniel heard it clearly. His body reacted instantly, muscles tightening, breath catching. Do not reach, Keller warned, raising the device. I'm not reaching, Daniel said. My hands haven't moved. Then do exactly what I say. Daniel stared straight ahead, the words echoing in his mind. Exactly what I say. This was the point where rights became irrelevant, where survival demanded obedience without explanation, where the goal was no longer fairness, but endurance. And in that moment, Daniel understood something with painful clarity. This officer did not see him as a man making a morning commute. He did not see a professional. He did not even see a citizen deserving of patience. He saw a threat shaped by expectation, and that expectation was powerful enough to rewrite reality itself. The lesson pressed in on him, heavy and unavoidable. Bias doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers instructions that feel reasonable to the person giving them. Sometimes it hides behind procedure and calls itself caution, but its impact is always the same. It turns human beings into risks. It turns fear into justification. It turns ordinary moments into life or death encounters. As Keller stood behind him, taser aimed, Daniel made a quiet decision. Not about compliance, he had already given that, but about timing. There would be a moment soon when words would no longer protect him, and when that moment came, he would have to choose whether to reveal the truth that could save him, or hold on to the hope that the truth shouldn't have to. On an empty road in Columbus, Ohio, two men stood suspended between who they were and what they believed the other to be, and the space between those beliefs was filled with consequences. Perfect compliance isn't protection. Daniel had done everything right. That was the thought looping through his mind as he stood facing his car, palms flat against the hood, fingers spread wide beneath the glare of the streetlight. Every movement he had made from the moment the lights flashed behind him had followed the script he himself had taught to others. Signal, pull over promptly, lights on, windows down, hands visible, voice calm, perfect compliance. And yet here he was. Behind him, Officer Keller shifted his weight, boots scraping against the pavement. The taser remained raised, not pointed directly at Daniel's back, but close enough that the distinction felt meaningless. The red laser dot flickered briefly across the hood of the car, dancing like something alive. Daniel focused on his breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow, measured. He had taught rookies that control began inside. If they could slow themselves down, they could slow a situation down. That panic was contagious, and calm could be too. But calm only worked when it was mutual. "What are you really doing out here?" Keller asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. "Nobody goes to work this early unless they're trying to avoid something." Daniel flinched internally, though his body remained still. "I work mornings," he said. "That's all there is to it." Keller scoffed. "Yeah, sure." The dismissal stung more than Daniel expected. Not because he needed validation from this officer, but because the exchange revealed something deeper. The truth no longer mattered. Facts were optional. Narrative was everything. Daniel realized then that he was not being investigated. He was being interpreted. Keller stepped closer again, close enough that Daniel could smell the faint trace of stale coffee on his breath. Close enough that Daniel could feel the heat of his body through the thin October air. "You're awfully calm for someone who smells like weed," Keller said. Daniel swallowed. "There is no marijuana in my car." "You keep saying that," Keller replied. "People lie." The words felt heavy with implication. Not some people, not suspects, just people. But Daniel knew who was being included in that category. He had seen this dynamic play out from the other side of the badge countless times. He had watched officers interpret nervousness as guilt, silence as defiance, and questions as threats. He had corrected reports where vague language replaced facts, furtive movements, suspicious behavior, refusal to comply. Standing here now, he understood how easily those phrases were born. They came from moments like this, where an officer's discomfort became justification. "Am I being detained?" Daniel asked quietly. Keller stiffened. "Don't get smart. I'm asking a legal question." "You don't need to know the law," Keller snapped. "I do." Daniel closed his eyes for half a second, not in defiance, but in restraint. He could feel the tension coiling tighter, like a spring wound too far. This was the paradox he had spent years trying to explain to young officers. That authority without humility was brittle. The louder you had to assert control, the less of it you actually possessed. But Keller was not listening. "Spread your feet wider," Keller ordered. Daniel complied. "Wider." He shifted again, the stretch uncomfortable, exposed. He felt ridiculous standing like this on an empty road, reduced to a posture that felt less like procedure and more like humiliation. Keller paced behind him, his movements erratic. Daniel could sense his indecision, the way fear tugged at him from one direction and adrenaline from another. "You got anything on you I should know about?" Keller asked. "No." "You sure?" "Yes." Keller laughed again, short and sharp. "Everybody's sure." Daniel felt something hot rise in his chest. Not anger exactly, but a deep weariness. The exhaustion of knowing that no answer would ever be sufficient. That certainty itself was suspicious. That denial was guilt wearing a mask. This was the lie at the heart of so many encounters, the belief that obedience could erase bias. Daniel had believed it once too. As a younger officer, fresh out of the academy, he had clung to the idea that professionalism was a shield. That if you followed the rules, treated people fairly, and upheld the Constitution, the system would do the same for you. But years had taught him otherwise. Professionalism was expected. Compliance was demanded. Neither guaranteed safety. Keller stopped moving. "Turn your head to the left," he said. Daniel did. "Now the right." He complied again. Each instruction chipped away at something small but vital. The sense of being seen as a person rather than an object being inspected. The road was still empty. No witnesses, no cameras beyond the one strapped to Keller's chest. Daniel wondered how many stories began this way, unseen. "You know," Keller said suddenly, "people who don't have anything to hide usually don't ask so many questions." Daniel almost smiled at the irony. Almost. "I haven't asked many questions," he replied. "That one was enough." Silence settled again, thick and oppressive. The streetlight buzzed overhead, its glow casting long shadows that distorted both men into unfamiliar shapes. Daniel thought about his children, still asleep at home, about the lunches packed the night before. The homework was waiting on the kitchen table. He thought about how fragile those ordinary details suddenly felt. He thought about how many men before him had stood in similar positions, telling themselves to stay calm, to cooperate, to trust that the system would recognize their humanity. And he thought about how often that trust had been betrayed. Keller's radio crackled softly with distant chatter. He ignored it. "I'm going to search your car," Keller said. "Step back." "There's no probable cause," Daniel said, the words coming out almost instinctively. "You said you smelled marijuana. That's subjective." Keller turned sharply. "You calling me a liar?" "I'm saying there's nothing illegal in my vehicle." Keller's face flushed. "I don't need your permission." Daniel felt the moment tipping again, the line between assertion and punishment blurring. "Listen to me," Daniel said, his voice steady but urgent. "This doesn't need to go any further." Keller's eyes narrowed. "You don't get to decide that." There it was, the truth that lies beneath everything else. Control was not about safety. It was about who got to decide when enough was enough. Keller reached for his taser again, this time lifting it higher, the red dot settling squarely on Daniel's chest. Daniel's breath caught despite himself. "Stop talking," Keller said. "Just do what you're told." Daniel went still. In that moment, he understood something with painful clarity. Compliance was no longer the goal. Submission was. And submission demanded more than obedience. It demanded silence, erasure, the surrender of dignity. The lesson pressed down on him like a weight. In America, we are taught that following the rules keeps us safe, that respect is returned when it is given. The law is a shield. But standing there, Daniel felt how thin those assurances were when filtered through fear and prejudice. How easily they collapsed under the gaze of someone who had already decided who you were. Perfect compliance hadn't protected him. Knowledge of the law hadn't protected him. Years of service hadn't protected him. Only one thing remained, one truth that could still shift the balance of power, and Daniel felt the cost of that realization settle deep in his bones. Because if he had to reveal who he was to be treated like a human being, then the system had already failed. The pain of that understanding hurt more than the cold metal beneath his hands. As the taser's red dot burned against his chest, Daniel prepared himself, not for resistance, but for revelation. And the audience feels it too. The rising ache, the tightening chest, the unbearable knowledge that survival should never require proof of worth. When survival replaces rights, there is a moment in every confrontation when the rules change. It doesn't announce itself loudly. There is no signal, no official declaration that the law has loosened its grip. It arrives quietly, slipping into the space between words, carried on a shift in tone, a tightening jaw, a finger resting too long on a trigger. Daniel felt that moment arrive as the red dot of the taser settled against his chest. It wasn't the weapon itself that frightened him most. It was the certainty behind it, the knowledge that Officer Keller had crossed an invisible threshold where procedure no longer guided him. Emotion did, fear, and fear, when backed by authority, was lethal. "Do not move," Keller warned, his voice tight, high, strained as a wire pulled too far. "Do not say another word." Daniel went still. He could hear his own breathing now, loud in his ears, uneven despite his efforts to control it. He forced himself to slow it down, counting silently. 1, 2, 3. He had taught officers to do this, to anchor themselves before acting, but no one had ever taught him how to calm the person holding the power over his life. The morning air felt suddenly thinner. Daniel stared at the dull reflection of his face in the car's paint, distorted and unfamiliar. He looked older, like this, pinned between light and shadow, smaller, reduced. This was the position that history remembered him in. Hands up, head down, waiting. Keller took a step closer. Daniel could feel it, even without turning his head. The proximity sent a jolt through his body, every instinct screaming danger. "You're not listening," Keller said. "I told you to stop talking." "I'm listening," Daniel replied softly. "Then act like it." The taser shifted slightly, the red dot moving higher, closer to Daniel's heart. He felt his pulse thudding beneath it, a living target. Daniel knew the statistics. He had lectured on them. how quickly situations escalated once a weapon entered the equation. How often was non-compliance written into reports to justify force? He also knew something else, something that wasn't written down. The margin for error was razor thin when you looked like him. "Please," Daniel said, the word escaping before he could stop it. It wasn't a plea for mercy, it was a plea for time, for space, for a reason. Keller bristled. "Don't please me," he snapped. "You brought this on yourself." The words cut deeper than Daniel expected. Brought this on yourself. As if existing in the wrong body at the wrong hour was a choice. As if compliance had been optional. As if fear flowed in only one direction. Daniel felt a familiar ache rise in his chest. Not panic, not rage, but grief. The grief of recognizing that this moment was not unique, that it was part of a long, unbroken line of encounters where Black men were told implicitly or explicitly that their suffering was self-inflicted. He thought of his father again, of the warnings given with love and exhaustion. Be careful. Keep your hands visible. Don't argue. Get home. He thought of the young officers he supervised, full of certainty, convinced that good intentions were enough to protect them from becoming part of a problem they barely understood. And he thought of how alone he felt now, standing on this empty road, carrying all of that history in his body. "Knees!" Keller ordered suddenly. "Get on your knees!" Daniel's heart stuttered. This was new. "Knees!" Keller repeated louder. "Now!" Daniel hesitated, not out of defiance, but out of calculation. He knew what kneeling did to balance, to mobility. He knew how quickly a stumble could be interpreted as resistance. "I'm not resisting," he said carefully. "I'm telling you, I'm not resisting." Keller took another step forward, anger sharpening his movements. "I didn't say you were. I said get down." This was the moment, the precise instant where Daniel understood that asserting his rights was no longer just futile, it was dangerous. That every word he spoke carried the risk of escalation. That survival now required something far more difficult than obedience. It required surrendering his sense of fairness. Slowly, carefully, Daniel bent one knee toward the ground. The pavement was cold, biting through the fabric of his pants. He lowered himself further, muscles trembling, not from weakness, but from restraint. The red dot never left his chest. As his second knee touched the ground, a wave of humiliation washed over him, hot and overwhelming. This was not how he had imagined himself this morning, not how he had imagined serving his community, not how he had imagined being seen. A police sergeant, a Marine veteran, a man reduced to a kneeling silhouette on an empty road. Behind him, Keller exhaled sharply, as if relieved. Control had been reasserted. The threat is contained. But Daniel knew better. Nothing about this was contained. "You're going to stay right there," Keller said. "You move. You get tased. You understand?" "Yes," Daniel said quietly. His voice felt small now, swallowed by the space around him. Time stretched, elastic and unbearable. Daniel knelt in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He could feel the eyes of history on his back, the unrecorded, unremembered moments that never made it into reports or headlines. He wondered what Keller would write later. The suspect became uncooperative. Suspect failed to follow instructions. The officer feared for his safety. He wondered how easily truth could be bent to fit fear. Daniel's thoughts drifted dangerously toward despair, and he forced himself to pull back. He could not afford to disappear inside his own mind. Presence was protection. Awareness was survival. "Why are you doing this?" he asked softly. Keller hesitated. "What? Why are you escalating this?" For a split second, something flickered across Keller's face. Confusion, perhaps, or doubt, but it vanished almost instantly, replaced by irritation. "Because you're not being straight with me," Keller said. "Because nothing about you makes sense." Daniel felt the sting of that statement settle deep in his chest. Nothing about you makes sense. It wasn't about logic, it was about expectation. Daniel didn't fit the story Keller had already written in his head, and instead of revising it, Keller was trying to force reality to comply. That was the cruelty of bias. It punished contradiction. Daniel realized then that the space for patience was closing. The longer this went on, the more likely it was to end badly. Fear fed on duration. The longer Keller stayed in this heightened state, the more justification he would feel for force. Daniel had one option left, one truth that could cut through fear like a blade. But it came with a cost. Revealing who he was would likely save him. But it would also confirm something he did not want to accept, that his safety depended not on his humanity, but on his proximity to power. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. This was the hill. Not the hill of his rights, but the hill of his life. Slowly, deliberately, he spoke. "Officer," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him, "you need to listen to me." Keller tensed immediately. "I told you not to talk." "I am not reaching," Daniel continued calmly. "I am not resisting, but you are making a mistake." Keller's finger tightened on the taser. "What mistake?" he snapped. Daniel inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with the cold morning air. "The mistake," he said, "is assuming that the only thing that makes a man safe is your fear." Silence fell, heavy in charge. Daniel knew that his next words would change everything, for better or worse. Once spoken, they could not be taken back, that they would expose a truth too painful to ignore. In that kneeling posture, on an empty road before sunrise, Daniel felt the full weight of what it meant to live in a country where survival sometimes required credentials, where dignity could be delayed, where rights could be postponed, where love for the law did not guarantee protection from it. And as he prepared to reveal the truth that might save his life, the lesson pressed in on him with devastating clarity. A system that demands proof of worth before granting safety is already broken. All Daniel could do now was hope that broken systems could still pause long enough for one man to stand up again. The reveal that saves a life. Daniel knelt on the cold pavement, the weight of the morning pressing down on him like a held breath. He could feel the taser trained on his chest without needing to see it. The red dot burned through the fabric of his jacket, steady and merciless, as if marking a decision already made. His knees ached. His hands trembled, not with fear alone, but with restraint. Every instinct in his body screamed to protect himself, to rise, to create distance. But he stayed still. Stillness had become his armor. "Officer," Daniel said again, carefully, deliberately, "I need you to slow down." Keller's response was immediate and sharp. "Do not move." "I'm not moving," Daniel replied. "I'm speaking." Keller hesitated, just long enough for the silence to stretch thin. The hesitation was barely perceptible, but Daniel felt it. He had seen that pause before, the flicker of uncertainty when an officer realized something wasn't aligning the way it should. "What do you want?" Keller snapped. Daniel inhaled slowly. This was it. The moment where survival demanded a truth he never wanted to use as currency. "I am going to unzip my jacket," Daniel said. "I am not reaching for a weapon. Do not tase me." Keller stiffened instantly. "Don't reach." "I'm telling you what I'm doing before I do it," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "I'm showing you my credentials." There it was. The word hung in the air, heavy and electric. Credentials. Keller's breathing quickened. "You don't have credentials," he said, but the confidence had drained from his voice. "I do," Daniel replied. "And if you tase me right now, you will end your career." The taser wavered. For the first time since the stop began, Keller looked uncertain. Not angry, not defensive, but confused. The story he had constructed was beginning to crack, and he didn't yet know how to repair it. "Slowly," Keller warned. "Real slow," Daniel nodded. "I'm moving slowly." He raised his right hand an inch at a time, fingers trembling not from guilt, but from the terrifying awareness that any misinterpretation could be fatal. He grasped the zipper of his jacket between his thumb and forefinger. "Don't shoot me," Daniel said quietly. Not dramatically, not accusingly, just truthfully. The zipper slid down with a soft, almost polite sound. As the jacket parted, the streetlight caught something metallic at Daniel's waist. Gold. The badge gleamed sharply in the darkness, reflecting the red and blue of the patrol lights in fractured bursts. Beside it sat his holstered service weapon, secured, unmistakable. The radio clip, the spare magazine, the unmistakable silhouette of law enforcement. Time stopped. Keller froze mid-breath. The taser lowered an inch, then another. His mouth opened, then closed again. His eyes darted from the badge to Daniel's face and back again, as if his mind were struggling to reconcile two realities that had never been meant to coexist. The suspect and the officer, the black man and the authority. Keller stammered. You're a cop? Daniel turned his head just enough for Keller to see his profile. His voice was calm now, steady in a way that came not from fear, but from certainty. I'm a sergeant, Daniel said. Columbus Police Department. I'm on my way to roll call. The transformation was immediate and devastating. Keller's posture collapsed inward, aggression draining out of him as if someone had pulled a plug. His shoulders sagged. His grip on the taser loosened. The red dot vanished from Daniel's chest. Oh, Keller swallowed hard. I didn't know. The words came out thin, fragile. Daniel exhaled slowly, the tension easing just enough for the magnitude of the moment to settle in his bones. You didn't ask, Daniel said. Keller took a step back, then another, as if distance itself could undo what had just happened. You didn't say anything, he added weakly. You said you worked downtown. I thought. You thought, Daniel repeated softly. Keller's face flushed. I mean, your car, it fit the description of a suspicious vehicle. A gray sedan, Daniel asked, finally turning enough to look at him. Half the city drives a gray sedan. Silence stretched between them, thick with shame. And the marijuana? Daniel continued. Do you still smell it? Keller looked down at his boots. The answer was written all over his posture. In that moment, the truth stood naked between them. Nothing about the situation had changed except Daniel's revealed identity. The same man who had been moments from being tased was now suddenly worthy of explanation, apology, and restraint. The badge hadn't changed Daniel. It had changed Keller. I'm sorry, Keller muttered. This was just a misunderstanding. Daniel felt the bitter taste of those words settle on his tongue. Misunderstanding. As if fear justified everything that came after it. As if the threat had been imagined. As if kneeling on cold pavement with a weapon aimed at your chest could be reduced to confusion. Stand up, Keller said quickly, gesturing awkwardly. You can get up. Daniel rose slowly, his knees stiff, his body aching. As he stood, he felt the weight of the moment shift, not into relief, but into something heavier. The knowledge that he was safe now, not because he was innocent, but because he was recognized. The realization cut deeper than fear ever had. Daniel adjusted his jacket, leaving it unzipped, not out of pride, but necessity. He had learned the lesson too well to forget it now. You should call your supervisor, Daniel said calmly. Keller's eyes widened. Sarge, I don't think that's necessary. It is. I mean, this can just go away, Keller said hurriedly. Professional courtesy, right? Daniel studied him for a long moment. Professional courtesy. The phrase landed like an insult. There was no courtesy when you pulled a taser on me, Daniel said. There was no courtesy when you made up probable cause. And there would have been no courtesy if I didn't have this badge. Keller's voice dropped. I said I'm sorry. Daniel nodded slowly. That's not accountability. The truth of the moment settled over both men, heavy and unavoidable. If Daniel had been a teacher, this story would not have ended here. If he had been an accountant, a mechanic, a delivery driver, he might have left this road in handcuffs. Or worse, the badge had acted like a pause button on violence, and that pause had nothing to do with justice. The lesson pulsed painfully through Daniel's chest. In this country, authority could rewrite fear, but innocence could not. As they waited for Keller's supervisor to arrive, Daniel stood beside his car, arms folded, the early morning chill creeping back into his bones. The city began to stir around them, unaware of how close one of its servants had come to becoming a statistic. Daniel watched the horizon lighten with the first hints of dawn and felt no comfort in it. Because the sun rose every day on stories like this, and most of them did not end with a badge revealed in time. The system protects itself. The patrol SUV arrived 10 minutes later. 10 minutes can feel like nothing, or like a lifetime, depending on what you are waiting for. For Daniel, those minutes stretched long and heavy, filled with the slow return of sensation to his knees and the quiet reckoning that comes after danger passes but before meaning arrives. The sky had begun to lighten, the indigo of night thinning into gray. The city was waking up. A delivery truck rumbled past at the far end of the road. Somewhere a bus hissed to a stop. Life continued, oblivious to how close it had come to losing someone who had sworn to protect it. The supervisor's vehicle pulled in behind Keller's, lights flashing briefly before going dark. A middle-aged lieutenant stepped out, white, broad-shouldered, his movements weary rather than urgent. This was not his first problem of the morning, and it showed. When he saw Daniel standing beside his car, jacket unzipped, badge visible, his shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly. "Daniel," the lieutenant said, recognition flickering across his face. What the hell happened? They had worked together before. Task forces, training sessions, long meetings where words like community and trust were spoken easily, without weight. Daniel met his gaze steadily. "Your officer pulled me over for no reason, accused me of having drugs, pulled a taser on me." The lieutenant exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. He turned to Keller, motioning him aside. "Come here." The two men walked a few steps away. Keller's posture shifted immediately, shoulders hunched, head slightly bowed. The body language of a subordinate caught in a mistake. The body camera footage continued to roll, but when the lieutenant leaned in to speak, his hand reached up and muted the audio. A small gesture, a familiar one. Daniel watched from a distance as the lieutenant gestured sharply, his mouth moving in tight, clipped motions. Keller nodded repeatedly, his face cycling through defensiveness, then embarrassment, then something like fear. Daniel knew this choreography. He had seen it play out dozens of times. Supervisors smoothing edges, reframing events, deciding which truths were safe to record and which were better left undocumented. It was rarely described as a cover-up. That word was too harsh, too accusatory. It was called handling it internally. When the lieutenant returned, his tone had changed. It was softer now, measured, conciliatory. "Daniel," he began, "look, this was a bad stop. No question. He's young. He got tunnel vision. It happens." Daniel felt a quiet tightening in his chest. It happens. The phrase landed with the weight of countless incidents minimized by familiarity. "He saw a car that matched something we've been looking for," the lieutenant continued. "Early morning, empty road. Things escalated faster than they should have." Daniel held his gaze. "He aimed a taser at me while I was on my knees." The lieutenant nodded slowly, as if conceding a point in a negotiation. "I understand why you're upset." Upset, not endangered, not violated, upset. "We'll address it," the lieutenant added quickly. "We don't need to make this bigger than it is. No one got hurt." Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. No one got hurt, as if harm only counted when blood was visible, as if terror left no scars, as if kneeling on asphalt with a weapon trained on your chest was merely an inconvenience. "I want a case number," Daniel said. The lieutenant paused. "Daniel, I want a formal report." A subtle shift rippled through the lieutenant's expression. The warmth cooled. The professional smile tightened at the edges. "Come on," he said. "You know how this works." Daniel nodded. "I do." "We handle this internally," the lieutenant said. "We talk to him. He gets counseling, maybe some remedial training. There's no reason to drag this into paperwork." Drag, as if accountability were a burden rather than a responsibility. "If I didn't have my badge," Daniel said quietly, "this would already be paperwork." The lieutenant sighed. "That's not fair." Daniel almost laughed. "What's not fair," he replied, "is that he was ready to tase me for driving to work." The lieutenant glanced back at Keller, who stood a few feet away, eyes fixed on the ground. "He didn't know who you were." "That's the point," Daniel said. Silence stretched between them. The lieutenant lowered his voice. "You filing a complaint is going to have consequences." Daniel met his eyes. "For who?" "For everyone," the lieutenant said. "For him, for you, for the department. It's going to look bad. Blue on blue." Daniel felt the phrase strike something deep and raw. Blue on blue, he repeated softly. Then he shook his head. It wasn't blue on blue, he said. It was blue on black. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The lieutenant's jaw tightened. Daniel, don't do this. Don't do what? Don't be that guy, the lieutenant said. You're going to ruin a kid's career over a bad call. Daniel felt the weight of that framing press down on him, the way responsibility was being shifted, subtly but firmly. How the harm done to him was being weighed against the potential inconvenience to someone else. A kid's career, not a man's life, not a citizen's dignity, a career. I didn't pull a taser on myself, Daniel said evenly. I didn't lie about probable cause. I didn't escalate this. The lieutenant's voice hardened slightly. You know the pressure we're under, the scrutiny. The public's already against us. Daniel felt a quiet anger rise. Not sharp, not explosive, but resolute. I am the public, he said. That stopped the lieutenant cold. Daniel continued, his voice calm but unwavering. I'm also the one you call when things go sideways. I train officers not to do exactly what happened out here this morning. He took a breath. And if I stay silent because it's uncomfortable, then I'm complicit. The lieutenant studied him for a long moment, something like disappointment crossing his face. All right, he said finally. You want a case number? You'll get one. The words carried a subtle warning. The report was filed later that day. Daniel went to work after the stop, led roll call with hands that still trembled slightly, spoke the same words he always did about restraint and respect. His officers listened, unaware that their sergeant had nearly become another cautionary tale before sunrise. The investigation moved slowly. Internal affairs asked questions that circled responsibility without landing on it. Why hadn't he identified himself sooner? Why were his windows tinted? Did he make any sudden movements? Daniel recognized the strategy. Find the smallest deviation, the tiniest crack, just enough to shift blame. The body camera footage told a different story. It showed a calm, compliant man and an agitated, escalating officer. It showed the marijuana claim dissolving into nothing. No drugs, no contraband, no justification. Daniel submitted to a voluntary drug test anyway. It came back clean. Officer Keller received a 3-day suspension without pay and mandatory bias training. 3 days. A pause, a reset, a chance to move on. Daniel paid a different price. Word traveled quickly the way it always did. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms. Eyes lingered too long, or not at all. Someone left a dead rat on his windshield in the precinct parking lot, its meaning unmistakable. You broke the code. Daniel felt the isolation settle in, not loudly but persistently, the quiet erosion of belonging. Yet he stayed. He stayed because he knew what it felt like to be on the other side of the flashlight. Because leaving would not make the system better, it would only make it more insulated. He stayed because love sometimes looked like endurance. The lesson of that morning became clear in the days that followed. Racism did not survive because of one officer's fear. It survived because systems prioritized comfort over accountability. Because silence was rewarded. Because truth was treated as betrayal. But Daniel also learned something else. That choosing integrity, though lonely, planted seeds he might never see grow. That standing for dignity, his own and others, was an act of love, not defiance. And that a stronger America would not be built by protecting institutions from discomfort, but by protecting people from harm. Even when it costs something. The price of telling the truth. The danger passed quickly. The cost did not. In the days after the complaint was filed, Daniel moved through his routines as if through water, everything slower, heavier, resistant. He woke before dawn out of habit, but sleep no longer rested easily in his body. When it came, it brought fragments. The red dot on his chest, the cold pavement biting into his knees, the sound of a zipper sliding down in the dark. He stopped driving to work the same way. Instead of slipping his uniform shirt onto a hanger in the back seat, he wore it fully buttoned now, pressed sharp, stripes visible. His badge no longer rested quietly at his waist. It sat on the dashboard, unmistakable, catching the light. A signal, a warning, a plea. Daniel hated what that change represented. even as he made it without hesitation. He hated that his safety now depended on announcing his status before he could announce his humanity. He hated that the badge had become a passport rather than a responsibility. At work, the air felt different. Conversations softened when he approached, then stopped entirely. Laughter died mid-breath. Eyes slid away. A few officers offered stiff nods, respectful, distant, rehearsed. Others didn't acknowledge him at all. The message didn't need words. He had broken something sacred. The blue wall was rarely described as a wall. It was called solidarity, brotherhood, trust. But Daniel understood now how fragile that language was, how easily it collapsed when tested by truth. In the locker room one morning, he found a dead rat on the bench in front of his locker. Its body was stiff, tail curled unnaturally, eyes glassy and fixed. Someone had placed it carefully, deliberately, where he could not miss it. There was no note. None was needed. Daniel stood there for a long moment, staring at it, feeling a familiar mix of anger and sadness settle into his chest. Rat, snitch, traitor. He had seen these tactics used before. Quiet intimidation meant to remind someone of their place, but experiencing it firsthand felt different, more personal, more lonely. He disposed of the rat without a word, washed his hands, took a breath, went to roll call. From the front of the room, Daniel watched his officers file in. Young faces, eager faces, some nervous, some cocky. He saw reflections of Keller in a few of them. The restless energy, the hunger to prove something, the certainty that the world would respond to authority if authority was asserted loudly enough. He wondered which of them would have pulled him over, which of them would have aimed a taser at his chest, which of them would have believed without question that fear was the same thing as danger. The thought sat heavily with him as he began the briefing. "Remember," he said, his voice steady, "slow things down. Respect buys you time. Time buys you safety." The words sounded thinner now, tested by experience. After a roll call, he retreated to his office and closed the door. For the first time in his career, Daniel allowed himself to sit still and feel the weight of what had happened. Not just the stop, but the aftermath. The investigation had concluded quietly. Officer Keller returned to duty after 3 days in a training session. He still wore his uniform, still carried his weapon, still patrolled streets that looked like the one where Daniel had knelt. Daniel received no apology from the department, no acknowledgement that what he had endured was wrong beyond policy language and procedural phrasing. The system had absorbed the incident and moved on, as it always did. But Daniel could not. He noticed the changes in himself almost immediately. He flinched when patrol lights appeared suddenly in his mirrors, even when he was driving home in full uniform. His pulse quickened when officers approached too fast, even when they were colleagues. His body no longer distinguished easily between threat and memory. At home, his wife noticed too. "You're quieter," she said one evening, watching him from across the kitchen table. "You okay?" Daniel hesitated. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to protect her from the truth, the way he had always tried to protect his children. "I'm tired," he said finally. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. The truth was heavier. The truth was that he felt exposed in a way he never had before. Not just as a black man in America, but as a black man inside an institution that demanded loyalty even when it failed him. The truth was that he understood now how conditional belonging really was. He had been safe that morning because he could reveal who he was. But what about the men who couldn't? The teachers, the delivery drivers, the fathers are on their way to early shifts, the sons who didn't carry badges to unzip in moments of crisis. Daniel carried them with him now. He saw them in every traffic stop, every late-night call, every nervous glance. He saw himself in them too, stripped of rank and recognition. And still, he stayed. Friends asked him why. Why keep wearing the uniform? Why keep showing up for an institution that had turned cold the moment he demanded accountability? Daniel struggled to explain it. The reasons were tangled, layered with contradiction. He stayed because leaving would have felt like surrender, because walking away would not erase the problem. It would only remove one voice willing to name it, because he believed that change, however slow, required presence. He stayed because love, he realized, was not always soft. Sometimes love looked like standing in uncomfortable rooms. Sometimes it looked like being misunderstood. Sometimes it looked like choosing integrity over approval. But the cost remained. He modified his life in small, quiet ways. He avoided certain routes home. He kept his badge visible whenever he drove. He warned his children earlier than he'd planned about hands on the wheel, about being polite, about how the world might see them. Those conversations hurt the most. They were necessary. They were loving. They were unfair. Daniel felt the contradiction settle deep inside him. Pride in his service, grief for its limits, hope for progress, exhaustion from waiting for it. And yet, beneath the weight of it all, something else remained. Resolve. He had told the truth when it mattered. He had refused to let fear or convenience rewrite what he knew to be right. That knowledge steadied him on days when the isolation felt sharpest. The lesson of the price he paid was clear, and it extended beyond him. Racism does not only wound in moments of violence, it erodes in silence. It punishes honesty. It demands that those harmed absorb the cost to keep systems comfortable. But the opposite was also true. Truth once spoken did not disappear. It lingered. It unsettled. It planted itself in places where silence had once lived. Daniel held on to that as he moved through his days. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. He knew he would carry this experience with him for the rest of his career, and likely the rest of his life. But he also knew this: a stronger America would not be built by pretending moments like his never happened. It would be built by people willing to endure discomfort for the sake of dignity and isolation for the sake of justice, even when the price was high. A stronger America is still possible. The hardest part wasn't the stop. It wasn't the taser aimed at his chest. It wasn't the cold pavement against his knees. It wasn't even the silence that followed when the system chose comfort over truth. The hardest part was waking up the next morning and realizing that life would continue, unchanged for most people, while something inside him had been permanently altered. Daniel Brooks drove to work just after sunrise. A week later, the sky was pale with early light. His uniform shirt was buttoned, his badge resting visibly on the dashboard. Traffic had returned to the roads. Parents hurried their children into cars. Workers sipped coffee at red lights. The city moved forward, unaware of the private reckonings carried by the people inside it. At a stoplight, Daniel caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked the same, but he wasn't. He had learned something that morning on the empty road, something that could not be unlearned. That safety in America was not evenly distributed, that dignity was not guaranteed, that the line between life and tragedy could be as thin as a zipper. And yet, despite everything, he still believed in people. Not blindly, not naively, but deliberately. At the precinct, Daniel went about his day as he always had. He reviewed reports, mediated disputes, checked in on officers struggling under the weight of the job. When he walked the halls, some still looked away. Others nodded with quiet respect. A few stopped him to talk, hesitant at first, then earnest. "I heard what happened," one young officer said one afternoon, voice low. "I've been thinking about it a lot." Daniel listened. That was how change began, not with speeches, but with listening, with discomfort allowed to breathe, with moments where certainty softened into curiosity. Over time, those moments added up. Daniel requested changes in training, slower approaches, more emphasis on de-escalation, more honest conversations about fear, where it came from, and who paid the price when it went unchecked. He spoke not as an accuser, but as a witness. Some resisted, some dismissed, some leaned in. Progress was uneven, fragile, and frustratingly slow. But it was real. At home, Daniel talked to his children differently now, not with bitterness, but with clarity. He taught them pride alongside caution, confidence alongside awareness. He told them the truth, not to frighten them, but to prepare them. "We deserve respect," he told them, "and we also have to look out for each other." His wife listened quietly, sometimes reaching for his hand when the words grew heavy. Love, Daniel learned, was not about shielding one another from pain. It was about standing together inside it. There were nights when the memories returned sharply, when the red dot burned bright behind closed eyes, when the question replayed itself again and again. What if the badge hadn't been there? Daniel didn't push those thoughts away anymore. He let them come. Let them remind him why his voice mattered. Not because he was special, but because he wasn't. He was ordinary. And that was the point. The story that nearly ended his life was not extraordinary. It was familiar. It echoed across highways and side streets, in cities and towns, in moments that rarely made headlines unless the ending was irreversible. That was why telling it mattered, not to shame, not to divide, but to illuminate. Daniel began speaking to community groups, to recruits, to anyone willing to listen. He told the story plainly, without embellishment, without anger. He described the fear, the silence, the shift when the badge appeared, and then he asked a simple question. What does it say about us if safety depends on status instead of humanity? People sat with that question. Some shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded slowly. Some wiped away tears they hadn't expected. Those moments didn't fix everything, but they opened something, and openings mattered. Because of racism, Daniel came to understand, thrived in distance, in the space between us and them. It survived on assumptions left unchallenged and stories left untold. But empathy closed that distance. Love crossed it. One evening, months later, Daniel drove home along the same road where it had all begun. The streetlights hummed softly. Traffic passed without incident. He slowed as he reached the spot beneath the flickering lamp where he had once knelt. He pulled over. For a moment, he sat in silence, hands resting on the wheel. He felt the ache of the memory and something else too. Resolve. He thought about the officer Keller had been that morning, young, afraid, unprepared for the weight of authority. He did not excuse the behavior, but he refused to reduce a human being to his worst moment. That too was part of the lesson. Rejecting racism did not mean rejecting people. It meant rejecting fear as a guide, rejecting silence as a shield, rejecting the lie that some lives were worth less patience than others. Daniel believed still that America could be better than its reflexes, but only if people chose to be. A stronger America would not be built by pretending pain did not exist. It would be built by acknowledging it honestly, then refusing to let it harden into hate. It would be built by neighbors looking out for one another, by officers slowing down, by citizens demanding accountability without abandoning compassion. It would be built by love that was brave enough to confront uncomfortable truths. As Daniel started the engine and pulled back onto the road, he felt something he hadn't felt that morning before sunrise. Not relief, hope, not the fragile kind that shatters at the first sign of trouble, but the resilient kind, forged by survival and sustained by purpose. The kind that believes we can learn, that we can change, that we can choose one another. This story is not about one stop, one officer, or one badge. It is about a choice we face every day: to see before we judge, to listen before we react, to love before we fear. If we make that choice again and again, then the road Daniel stood on that morning will not always lead to pain. It will lead forward toward a country where dignity is not conditional, where safety is not selective, where humanity is not something you have to prove. A stronger America is still possible, but only if we build it together. What happened in this story was not an accident, and it wasn't rare. It was the result of fear left unchecked, power left unquestioned, and a system that too often asks people to prove their humanity before it protects it. The lesson here is not just about policing. It's about how we see one another. When we allow stereotypes to replace understanding, we turn people into threats instead of neighbors. When we stay silent to protect comfort, we allow injustice to survive. And when we forget that every person carries a life, a family, a story, we all lose something essential. But this story is not meant to leave you hopeless. It is meant to remind you that change begins with choice. The choice to slow down instead of react. The choice to listen instead of assume. The choice to love instead of fear. A stronger America is not built by pretending racism doesn't exist. It is built when we confront it honestly, together, and still choose compassion. It is built when we stand up for one another, even when it's uncomfortable. When we protect dignity as fiercely as we protect laws. When we remember that justice without humanity is not justice at all. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you reflect, don't let that feeling end here. Subscribe to the Racist Reality channel to support stories that speak truth, honor lived experiences, and push us toward a more just and loving future. Visit the channel and watch more videos. Listen to more voices. Share these stories with others. Because the more we understand each other, the harder it becomes to hate, and the easier it becomes to build the America we all deserve. Thank you for watching. Choose empathy. Choose courage. Choose one another.